Hello and welcome to the Sideline Live podcast. My name is Orla Keeling and I am the host of the podcast, where every week we bring you a brand new episode with guests ranging from Olympic champions to local heroes, coaches, support staff and anybody involved in the world of sport. Each week we will dive into different topics, including current affairs in sport, identity, skill, mindset, coaching, and also shine a light on those flying under the radar. So tune in every brand new episodes, new stories and new insights you've never heard before. Okay, brilliant. Delighted to be joined by Mr. Dan Kiernan, world-class tennis coach, tennis director, former professional tennis player, but most importantly, a fellow podcast host. Dan, thanks for joining me.
Ola, it's a pleasure. It's nice to be at the other side of the microphone or the camera. So no, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, give us an insight. We'll get into your career as a coach and as a player, but out of interest, why the podcast?
Podcast, yeah. Well, everyone has a podcast now, don't they?
True.
It's like no, I little bit. I as a podcaster, I'm used to research. So I know you started yours in 2020.
Yes, yeah.
Which I believe was when I started mine actually, and maybe quite similar to you. There was an epidemic going around the world that was causing us all problems, right? In COVID, and it was yeah. I guess I was at a stage with the academy. You're running an academy, an international tennis academy in Spain, but nobody can get to you. And the players that you're working with, international players who travel, so they couldn't travel, so they all went home. So it's which wasn't great for business. So you start going, well, what do we do? And um, I just started doing lots of things. We kind of, it was actually a bit of an interesting story. Maybe everyone was telling us what we couldn't do. So a couple of days in, I was like, I'm sick of everyone telling me what we can't do. So I started the Can Do project and I got in touch with everyone at the academy, all parents, all players, all coaches. And I said, look, I want everyone to present over the next couple of days what we can do during this period. I don't know how long it's going to be.
Love it.
And that was very much the mentality that we just jumped into. So what we could do is we actually ran the academy as normal, but we ran it online. So when it was a tennis session, we did a tactical or we did a technical session on Zoom, and people were doing volleys or technique, or we did tactics and we pulled up videos. When it was a physical session, then the fitness coaches were running fitness classes. We did mental training sessions, but we just made sure everyone continued their days as best as we could. And then we wanted to start looking into how we could get that more online. So we actually learned then how to do online programs that we could take external, which was a job that I wish I hadn't taken on because it kept me up till about 5 o'clock every night trying to learn these stupid programs and how to bring it together. But with them, we actually got a couple of big clients at big academies in America that joined us, and one of the things we also did to provide value to our players is to run Zoom calls and use, I guess, my network of getting some professional tennis players on. And I actually got Dan Evans was my first one, a British tennis player. And we did a question and answer, and I kind of did a bit of an interview with him, with all of the academy parents and players listening. And everyone loved it. And that was really the start of the podcast, I guess, because I then did a couple of Instagram lives, which famously Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal were trying to find in the tennis world. They were trying to find how to do it, and it was all a big, kind of people's attention were going on Instagram at that point. So then I think I had Heather Watson, a British tennis player, and I had a couple, and Jamie Murray came on. And it was actually Jamie Murray's agent said to me, Dan, that was good. Like Jamie talked about how that was like one of the best interviews he's had, and gave me kind of give me a little bit of air to my wings really in that space. So then I just thought to myself, okay, a podcast might be an idea. Googled how to set a podcast up.
The rest is
Um,
history.
set, got got an app, and then off I went really. Yeah, so that was the starting point. But it's been a lot of fun. A lot of fun to do that.
And you're right. Indeed, like at the moment, it's like, who are you if you don't have a podcast? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Everyone needs
Yeah.
one. Is that it? I was going to ask you the name of the podcast, Control the Controllables, and I love that can do project. I'm definitely going to rob that from you. Was that the point of it? Kind of controlling what we can control during COVID?
Yeah, well, yes, I'm maybe a bit embarrassed to say now, but maybe enough times past I could say it. It was actually called Control the Coronables to start. And I didn't, at the time, I maybe didn't quite appreciate how bad this whole coronavirus was, right? And we did a few episodes and, we were kind of playing into that. And Control the Controllables has been a big, I guess it means a lot to me, that, which ultimately is, take responsibility for yourself, and, I'm certainly guilty in my younger years of being a kind of blamer and being someone who, pointed fingers and looked elsewhere and, took me down maybe a couple of dark places that I then kind of was like, no, 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 you take control of your own life, Dan. And that led to me setting up the academy in Spain and, led to a lot of positive things that have happened. So it was a play on that, control the controllables is very much a big philosophy at the academy. But then after about maybe 3 or 4 months, I was like, I need to change this name. People, I'm going to get some backlash here. So I think we made the right move to do that, and we had a logo with Corona Balls, and we changed it all to controllables, which I think was the sensible and professional way to do it. And I don't think the first name would have had much legs for too long. But yeah, it's something it means a lot to me. It's something that means a lot to the academy and what the academy's been set up on. And then yeah, that obviously helped us a lot through that period as well.
You mentioned Tennis Academy. You are a director and set up your own academy. Just out of interest, how early do you introduce that to players? Where controlling the controllables, but really accountability. Like what age and how do you actually introduce that for people listening that want to introduce that with their own players?
It's not easy, right? I mean, we will have. Oh, I say we have strong values that were written down. We have performance behaviors that are written down. We have I guess, our principles, key principles that we're working towards, they're all in handbooks. They're all in, when coaches come in, at the start of every year. And when I say year, we're kind of the school year. So, we're September to August. That's kind of typical of a tennis academy. Um, we run an introductory week, so we'll have staff days. We'll go through all of these things. We'll then have team day with the players. We'll get them setting their goals, but almost like a collective ambition, and we'll get them talking about what their environment needs to be and their culture, and then we'll obviously nurture those messages in there. Um, but that's almost the easy stuff, right? It's kind of easy to say it and have it written down, and the harder bit is bringing it alive, right, and driving that through on a daily basis. So we'll have certain things we'll do, like we have a Friday circle every on Friday that all of the academy is there. They wait till we play matches on a Friday. Everyone stays till the end. The circle is very much about who we are as Team Soto. We're a team. It's united. We're together in an individual sport, but bringing that through, and that's something that after year two, we're in year 16 now. After year two, it was a rainy day. We were in La Linea on some indoor paddle tennis courts, and the Friday finished, and we'd done a skills session. And as we were leaving, we were about to run to the vans, and this 12-year-old girl said to me, "Where are we going, Dan?" I said, "Well, we're going to the van." And she said, "No, we've not done the circle yet." And I that day made up my mind we will never ever miss a circle. So during COVID, we did it on Zoom. We had like up to 150 players from past, present that were jumping on Zoom calls on a Friday. And what that is that's a chance for us to talk through the week, and it's a bit of a reflective time. We'll get players to give examples of how maybe someone else, shout someone else out on how they've really done something good that week that showcased the values of the academy. We'll might, have a we'll have a message that we want to give. It might be a kick up the backside. It might be, real positive. We'll celebrate achievements, and then we give a Player of the Week award, which is very much based around those values, and very much around the behaviours. They then get a yellow jersey, sort of tennis jersey. They wear that on the Monday, and I've seen players win that that have cried. Like we've managed to create it into something that is a thing. It's something that is of value to the players. So that's obviously one way. But what I like about that and the way that we've been able to bring that together is that then goes into the players' goal setting. That goes into, the messaging that's given to them on a daily basis, whether it's in their WhatsApp groups with their parents, or it's, they might put little reminders and their non-negotiables in the group description on their WhatsApp groups. When they win tournaments, I'm in Tokyo right now, but I've received a lot of messages today. There's players that have won tournaments on a Sunday. It's then a chance to kind of, for me in Tokyo or the coaches, wherever they are, to say, hey, well done. That's because of your day in, day out effort that you've put in over the last few weeks. That's well deserved. So it's just that kind of constant drip feeding. And the reality is, right, they just hear a 45-year-old guy that's going a bit grey with hair that's still talking at them, but I've learned now, having done it for many years, that they look back and they, most nearly, a lot of them will get in touch with me when they're in their 20s and say, you know what, Dan, I used to find it a bit boring, but I was kind of listening, and you know what, that really stuck with me, and that hearing that story stuck with me, and I've now really used that in other phases of my life. And now we've kind of got a bit of a network. We've got coaches around the world that were once players at the academy that are, I got one this summer. I'm doing the Friday circle at the end of my summer camps in San Francisco every Friday. And that messaging's then kind of drip feeding through into bigger networks, which that's the stuff that makes me feel like, oh, okay, we are getting it through. We're not just writing it on a bit of paper, and that's important.
Yeah, I've had some really good conversations on the podcast. I'll probably reference one or two episodes a couple of times in this chat. One of them being Conor Nyland. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if you've read The Racket. I've had him on, and I had Gavin Noble on. He's the Team Ireland chef de mission for the Olympics. But we discussed The Racket, so I'll probably reference Gavin. We were talking about specialisation with the two guys, and just in terms of tennis. And while the research is showing the more sports you play, the better. I don't know how accurate it is in terms of tennis and very specific events or sports. What's your take on specialisation? And in terms of why I reference Conor, is Conor made a point of any elite tennis player, they were handed a racket when they were very, very young. It was probably the parents more than the player that wanted it. What's your insight on that?
Yeah, look, I'm good friends with Connor, and
Oh, okay, I didn't realise.
yeah, I'm good friends with Connor. I would also, if you're listening, Connor, I'd call you out because you weren't so good, mate, when you were younger. But you were bloody good when you were older. I can say that because I used to beat his ass when he was 16 or so, but then he ended up being a better tennis player than myself, So I think Connor was he wasn't, I'm sure he was early specialization, but I'm not sure he was early development, actually. He was someone that physically grew a bit later, and a lot like a lot of the Irish players, because I tennis is not a big sport in Ireland, or tennis culturally, and I've had a lot of links to Ireland. We've had a lot of players at the academy. I've helped the Davis Cup team a little bit out there. Um, Tennis in Ireland tends to be an extracurricular activity. Education's so important, and the 16 to 18, the leaving cert, I
Yeah,
think it is that you do, like for love nor money, I can't get people to not do that, like it's like flipping heck, it's like the holy grail, this leaving cert,
literally, yeah.
it's unbelievable. And like, because it's quite common now in tennis culture that, and it's almost kind of, I'm not saying it's right, but it's reality that if you're any good internationally, you're leaving school at 14 and you're doing online. It's very difficult to combine the two in a physical way. It's not, it's absolutely, education's important, but if you're not gonna, if you're doing the Leaver Cert, or you're doing A levels in a UK school, or you're doing kind of the IB, which is what they do in one of our partner schools in Spain, there's just not enough time in the day. So you will have some standouts. So I'll come around to a bit better of an answer of what you've asked me, but you will, like I've had people on my podcast that genuinely at 16 weren't very good, but it's a bit of an outlier, who have gone on to be top 50, top 60 in the world. Players, there's a guy that's just Vachereau, who's just won this big event in Shanghai, beat his cousin in the final, like completely mad story that they're going to make a Netflix show on it for sure. It's like 204 in the world, but he was playing number six for his college in America only kind of 4 or 5 years ago, and he's now just won a Masters 1000 event, which is very rare that anybody outside the big names do that. But I would say if you don't have a racket in your hand early, the players that I've seen that have done well will always have stories that they did another sport to a high level. Like Yannick Sinner was an amazing skier, but Yannick Sinner, he's a bit of an outlier, and obviously he's been world number one and is will go down as one of the greatest in the game already, I'm sure. He he in the juniors, and there's all these kind of the numbers that you see. I think his highest ranking was 150 in the world in juniors, and he played a lot. Whereas nearly every other top player that we've ever seen would have been world number one or world top five in the world. But I put that down to the fact that he was world class or international class at another sport. I'm a massive, massive, massive fan of other sports up until an age. And I do not like, and I often feel I can tell that there's a tennis player that hasn't played another sport. And the things that I see, they lack social skills. I'll start there. Tennis from a young age, it gives you social skills eventually because you travel so much. But in general, it's a bit of a selfish sport. You're on your own. You're with a coach. So someone that's really early specialized, I can see he's not used to being in a team, and I don't like that element. I think you struggle to get some life skills, which life skills are all linked to your sporting skills anyway, and they're not then great with people, which might lead to them not being great with interviews, they might lead to them not being great with sponsors, they might lead. So that would be one thing. The way they move. I think if you ever have to teach a kid how to move, there's a bit of a problem because the best movers, Roger Federer, I bet he never really got taught how to move because he just naturally glides and opens his hip when he moves and gets the right shape when he changes direction. And these are all things that will come from other sports. They'll come from playing in the playground. They'll come from climbing trees, chasing people, knocking nine doors and running, whatever it might be. They'll come. Obviously, that doesn't happen as much anymore than it did back in my day when I was younger. So that's a big one. And then the third one for me, any sport is about controlling time and space. You watch the best footballers in the world, they've got time on the ball and they create space, whether it's because they're quick, or they move the ball quick to create space, or they've got an intelligence to create space, they're able to do things with time. And I think those are I was quite a good footballer up until 14. Played for Middlesbrough juniors, and that stuff made sense to me. Like timing of moves, all of these bits, and the angles on the court, the space that I'm trying to find, the game bit. Without if we're teaching every detail as a coach, we have a problem. Like, and that would be, and then my last one would be competitive skills. You you play some team sports and you get pushed around a bit by teammates or you get brought down to earth by teammates, or you are in the locker room going out to, right, we're playing a rival school or a rival team. It builds something inside you. There's a passion, and I think in general the best competitors I see tend like Andy Murray in tennis. Andy Murray was a great footballer, fantastic footballer. and he's a great golfer now already. Like he's just started playing golf, but he was obviously an unbelievable tennis player. But what a competitor! Like, I mean, that guy will bite your head off playing a game of Monopoly, right? So that comes, I think, from other sports as well. So, four, I think, main reasons I've given, but so all of those reasons, I just love, and I would go at the academy. It's a conversation I have a lot where I'm like, no, 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 they need to be playing other sports. They need to be doing this, and sometimes you get the odd kid who's very good, and the parents are on this brainwashed wave that Connor's talking about. They'll try them in the local football team two times and the kids won't like it because it's out their comfort zone and they'll take them out. And and they might go on to be decent tennis players, but it won't be the best for their overarching holistic view. I'll tell you that right now. And that's unfortunately a lot of people won't see that in the moment because in general, parents aren't really looking at the overarching development. They're thinking about their talented kid and how they can be really good now because that's the short-sighted way that naturally we think when we're attached to outcomes and emotions linked to it, right? So, sorry, I'm long-winded. It's nice to be able to be asked questions. I'm normally asking them, but it's long-winded answer. But that's yeah, I'm a big advocate of it.
Yeah, no, fascinating, and I loved the different pieces you gave there, and I'm writing things down, I'm making notes, and so I'm looking off to the screen in my notebook. But some really good things there. I'm going to rob life skills is linked to sports skills. I think that's brilliant. So it's interesting. So there is an element of, and I read a thing on LinkedIn. I thought it was brilliant. It was like if you're a parent and a coach is telling you and your kid to stop playing other sports, that's for the coach's benefit only and not the player, and it's a control thing. It's not actually of benefit to the coach at all. In terms of then to the point and the age, I'm interested as well, just from the home environment. What do the players need away from actually being coach tennis? What do they need in their environment to become the best they can be? And even before you get to them into the academy, what do the people around them or the environment need to be for someone to be successful when they're growing up?
Different elements of that question. I would start with they need to be loved unconditionally. That's and provided a secure, safe environment and a great childhood, right? Like, I coach some of the best players in the world. The issues all link back to psychology and things that have happened when they're younger. And like it might come out in a Grand Slam final or it might come out at a certain stage, not quite as high as that. But if you have that unconditional love in your household, you know are not rewarded for outcomes in any way. It's very much a value based and value led. Um, of course, you're gonna have to push your kids, but push your kids based on that, not just on outcomes of winning and losing, and them having a healthy mindset to competition, right? And having a healthy mindset to their sport and all of those things. So that would be the first thing. If we're talking about from skill acquisition standpoint, let your house be a bit messy. Stop stressing your hitting a ball up against the fireplace. So and that was one because my children play, and when my boy was young, I remember we had like a quite a big wall above the fireplace. The fire wasn't on, but it was quite a nice wall, and he would I'd always find him wanting to hit the ball against it, and that my parent thought was no, which we love doing as parents, no, because we're stressed and I tried to resist it because what I saw him doing was dexterity and learning to be able to move his racket in that way and his hand and eyeball hand-eye coordination and when I look at him as a tennis player now that's almost 15, and he's in Morocco playing an international tournament this weekend. He's a good tennis player. He's got lots he can get better at, but he has a pretty health. There's two things that I'm proud of as a parent. There's lots we can do better, but one, I would say he has a healthy attitude to competing. He's not afraid of competing. He looks at he's not great to hold his temper, and he has outward emotion and he can do things a lot better in that regard. But he's not someone who's scared of competition, because we've never built it up to be something big, or we've never knocked him down because he hasn't achieved. It's just he's playing tennis. If he wants to play tennis, okay. You're playing with your mates or you're playing competition. It's all the same thing. Just off you go. And the second thing, he's developed quite nice hand skills. And if I would say the hand skills bit would be down to messing around at home when he was younger, and or messing around on the wall, or messing around playing with me where I'm not coaching him, but we're just playing little games. So he's developed those things. The one regret's the wrong word, but I would say the one thing, two, I'll give two examples. One, gymnastics. Get your kid doing gymnastics. Unbelievable. Unbelievable for their body strength, awareness, all of those things that are just so transferable into all sports. And two, as a tennis player, so the Americans always have good serves. And if you think of the American sports, there's a lot of overarm throwing, whereas the Europeans tend to have better footwork or stronger legs. The Americans have all got these skinny little weedy legs because they love bench pressing and love throwing things, but don't really, have sports where they're working below the waists. Obviously, big generalization, but you get my point. I probably wish with all of my kids I'd spent a bit more time throwing things. And we didn't have dogs at the time. We've got dogs now. Dogs perfect. Take them out for a walk and get them throwing sticks or balls or whatever it is, because that this is tennis specific, but the overhead, being able to throw is basically the tennis serve, and having a really good throw at a young age will normally translate into having a pretty faultless, seamless, good serve. So that would maybe be a one that I would look and say do better. But ultimately, love your kids. Give them an unconditional, safe, secure environment. Let them play lots of games. Don't be the parent that's just saying no all the time. If you've got expensive seats, get rid of them. You can have those Ponzi seats once your kids have left. Do you know what I mean? Have a house and a garden that you don't mind being messed up a little bit, because you want your kids to have this expression of exploring and doing things, because that's ultimately where they're picking up all of these incredible skills that are then transferable into all different sports as well. And then also that freedom of mind. You want to also have creative kids who have got a freedom of mind to want to express themselves on the sports arena, whatever that sport is.
Brilliant, love that. One of the pieces I took from your website was your advice to younger players, based on your own experiences, to not take the losses so hard, give your best every single day, and do it with a smile on your face. I'm assuming part of that is lessons from your career of, one, what you did, but also maybe what you didn't do as a player.
Yeah, I mean, I if I talk about my personal experience, but I think this is linked to a lot of athletes in different sports. I think losing kills people. It's I couldn't handle the losing, and the losing my way, and I've always been someone who's had to watch my weight. Even when I was a professional athlete, I was never the skinny guy in a skinny sport, right? Tennis is a skinny, strong sport. So I was someone who was running like 10 miles 3 times a week. I was on the bike for 2 hours a day. Like, I think that was back how we were told in my day. I had to do it. I was eating probably half of what everyone else was eating, so I had this kind of complex on it already. But I'd lose a bad match and I'd go to McDonald's, and that was almost my self-punishment, right? And other people probably could have had a healthier one. Some people go on the running machine, and that maybe should have been my self-punishment rather than eating a Big Mac. But it's then you get in this spiral, and you get into that whole thing. And that On the website, yeah. I mean, that's a few years old, but I would live by all of those things. They link into a lot of my philosophies and things that I strongly believe in. I guess the one that I've maybe advanced it in my head is like, just we have to not, I've said it already, but if you're attached to an outcome, you're in trouble because an outcome will always bring a consequence. And nobody really knows what that consequence is. And the consequence for me as a youngster might be that I'm going to have the piss taken out of me by my mates if I lose that match. I can't handle that. Or it might be that I really fancy a girl and and she was watching and it's embarrassing to lose to this person. It might be that I've got a parent that's going to then shout at me in the car. It could be so many things, but if the outcome, it's not that that's not saying you don't want to win. Of course you do. That goes without saying. Everybody wants to win. It's not a fluffy thing I'm saying, and it's about winning and it's about getting better so you can win, but and sustainably win 100%. But if you're going out to play any match and you are so attached to the outcome that you really can't function clearly, and like I say, as the match goes on and the closer it gets to the end, and certainly the scoring system in tennis is set that way. It's set to kind of build and build and build, and you get towards the end of a set and then you play a tiebreak. Well, if now all of a sudden I'm playing a tiebreak and I put one foot wrong, I'm losing the point, losing the match. But the consequence is so getting more and more intense, and I'm gonna be in trouble. I just am. I'm not emotionally. I'm just not going to be able to handle that. So that ability to, of course, you want to win, but to be attached to other success measures. And it's obviously a bit cliche. We talk about it all the time, but to have those processes, to have those things in place, and measuring success in other ways, and understanding that I'm trying to have sustainable success. And in order to have sustainable success, I need to be committing to this, and this on a daily basis. And there has to be a bit of blind faith that that's going to take me there, or it's not. But I'm comfortable with either, and that's so I think that if we're able to do that, then we can smile a bit more and we can enjoy what we're doing. If we can't, even on the practice court, if we're attached, and I see it with kids all the time, they're attached to winning that tiebreak. They're attached to they're attached to making the forehand in the court because the parent's watching and they're telling them they're missing too many forehands. They're attached to the outcome of each individual shot in the wrong way. There can be a healthy way of doing that, and having accountability and a measured approach and these things. It's very difficult to get into the state of mind where you're finding joy from from the sport, and ultimately, if you're not finding joy from the sport, your shelf life's not very long. Because guess what? And I said it at the start of this little monologue, losing losing's too much and we can't handle the losing. So you're in McDonald's, or you not talking to anyone for 2 days, or you're not, and you'll get the odd superstar, or you'll get some superstars that maybe you'll hear them talk on TV and they'll say stuff that makes you go, well, I have to be like that because they're like that. They're a bit freakish in mindset as well, I think. I think there's certain people that are like a Roy Keane, or these sort of people. They're almost a little bit freakish in probably the way they think, and they will really enjoy the process without probably articulating that. It won't just be this kind of complete attachment to an outcome. It's actually they're locking into what it's going to take to win. But they'll sometimes articulate on TV that it's just about winning, and of course it is. But okay, Roy, how did you win? And I bet you absolutely committed to winning every tackle. You're committed to seeing the space on the pitch and understanding where the weakness of the opponents was. You're committed to getting the ball to Cristiano Ronaldo in a certain position. So you've got very clear tactics and strategies that you're playing with an intention to be able to do. And that's where I think we go a little bit wrong. We hear these people saying these things and we think now it's all about, it has to be about winning. and it's about the outcome. But then if you forget to do the process, you ain't gonna get the right outcome, right? So that certainly be something that we're trying to drip feed into our players as well on daily basis. Um, and yeah, those that are able to get in those mindsets give themselves a chance to achieve at least, their potential, or, go along that line and not be suffocated by what the negative outcomes can do to us all. And certainly I've been guilty of that.
Very interesting. Roy has been probably the most requested dinner guest. So if I ever get him on the podcast, I'll be sure to bring up that point around the process. It's really interesting. You sparked a couple of things there. One of them being around the process and not kind of putting all the emphasis on the outcome. And it's really interesting. I was having a conversation recently with somebody around that and kind of rewarding the outcomes in underage sport. And we were using, for example, they said athletics was, it's very defined first, second, third. And
Yeah.
as you go down, and the kids will know, very early on, and then you have other sports where they try not to keep the score, but the kids know who've won or not. And Paul McGinley, again, I should get commission. I tell everyone to listen to this episode, Paul McGinley High Performance Podcast. Jack Nicklaus gave him advice. I think it was that anyway. He said, paraphrasing here, I'm the most successful player to ever play, or one of them, and I spent the majority of my career losing. Like in a sport like tennis, where you're, unless you're one of the greatest of all time, you might break even in terms of 50% win-loss record. How do you detach the outcome in a sport like that, where it's so individualistic and it's so very black and white of you've won or you lost?
I think one of the biggest things I'd say there, Ola, is, and again, we do a lot of work on this in a sport like tennis. It's the reality. You need to know the reality of your sport. So tennis is a losing sport in many ways, and the I guess cheap example I use, but I think it's a very impactful one. Rafael Nadal won 14 Roland Garroses, but he lost 45% of points he ever played at Roland Garros. Serena Williams will be one of the greatest ever tennis players that has ever played our sport. Her first serve percentage is 60%, so she misses 4 out of 10 first serves, almost half of her serves she hits. To break the break of serve average is about 25-30% on the tour in terms of conversion of break points. So that means you've got to get 3 to 4 break points to get one break point to get to break serve. Yeah, I hear kids all the, oh, lost, oh, I had so many chances. I had my break point. I didn't take my break point. No, no, know your sport. Know your sport. What do you mean you got one break point and you didn't break serve? Like, know your sport. That's not what the sport is. And we'll do stuff where, and I'll do it. Well, we can do it now. Pick a number, and I'll be honest on this. Pick a number between 50 and 100, and I'll go to the rankings. So 77. So WTA singles, what WTA. So 77 in the world, and you can check this if anyone doesn't believe me. It is Ons Jabeur, the 77 in the world currently. She has played 30 matches in 2025, and she's won 15 and lost 15. So she's I mean, she's only won 15 matches in the whole year. The whole of 2025, she's won 15 matches, and she's 77 in the world and probably making millions based on that. That's a really good ranking. You've then got on the men's side, this is okay, so again, you've picked a good number, but this is kind of normal, is um Quentin Hallis from France. And he's won 19 matches but lost 28. And he's 77 in the world. So it's like, know your sport, guy. You get to go back to it, and we'll do this. We'll get them to, like, on a rainy day, or the problem is in Spain it's so bloody sunny all the time. It's hard to get them off court to do this stuff. But when it rains, it's like, okay, pick a player and find out everything about that player, and then you present it. And then, because you need you need to understand, and parents need to understand this as well. If you're going to be a tennis player, you're going to lose a lot. And it's like it's actually yeah, go back to what we talked about earlier, it's the losing that kills people. I wish someone had told me that. I just thought I was a loser. I didn't realize that. And the second point that I would make on that is role modeling linked to that. Stop role modeling Carlos Alcaraz. He's amazing. He's a freak. He's a delightful young man. But I knew him at 14. He was incredible. He's a generational talent. He's incredible. Well, it's not you don't just become Carlos Alcaraz. You kind of born Carlos Alcaraz in so many ways. But look at the journey of the player that went this route and was ranked like this at that age and suffered a bit and had challenges and stopped playing for a few months because they couldn't handle it and then they got going and then they went like and I shared that with the group the other day, this guy I've just mentioned, this Vashiro, 26, 27 years old, 4 years ago, he's played 5 years ago playing in college at number six. He's not been ranked inside 200 in the world in these first 4 or 5 years as a professional tennis player, and he's just gone and beat Novak Djokovic, the greatest ever male tennis player in the world, and Holger Rune and all of these players to win a Masters 1000 event, and it's happened at that age. It's the sort of sport that if you stick at it and you've got longevity and you can be persistent and resilient, you'll find your way. But you won't if you're attached to the outcome, but also if you don't know the realities, because the realities will. So it's like, and I've had people accuse me of saying these things are fluffy, Dan. They're fluffy. You don't. I don't fill my son with fluffiness like that. My son's a winner, and it's like, it's not fluffy. It's real, and of course we want to win. Absolutely, it goes without saying. But everything that we do is for sustainable success. Iga Swiatek, again, she's a freak, Iga. She won French Open at 19. She trained in our academy for a couple of weeks. I had her on the podcast, and Iga was like, well, I won the French Open, but I had no idea why I won the French Open. I had no idea. So I had to learn how to get sustainable success, and I had to go back to the drawing board. And this, we see it a lot with a lot of Raducanu, it's happened to over the last few years, Bianca Andreescu, a lot of one-time Grand Slam winners, but they don't know why. Or players that get quite highly ranked and then they drop out the rankings. And it's not because they're soft and it's not because they're this and all the things that they get accused of. It's because it's bloody hard, but they didn't know how they did it. They didn't know what their process was. They didn't know how to handle 35 weeks on the road. They didn't know how to build their body, their mind. They didn't know how to bring their game. There's so many aspects to it, and that's where I think individual sports are a lot more challenging than people realize as well. And it takes a lot, and it takes good people around you to be able to get to the point where you understand. We use that word process, but that process is deep rooted. Like that's like process of so many things, how you prepare, how you create the right mindset, the type of food that sits right with you, the type of people you need around you. The dynamic can change. I see it. I manage world-class players with teams around them. You drop a different person in there at a Grand Slam that's not been there with you before, it can change everything. It can change everything. Just one conversation, the wrong word, someone says something, someone puts something on Instagram. It's because we're dealing with real people, right? We're dealing with human beings. So it's really, really important, all of these things, and this is where you start getting the edges, but we need to keep people in the sport as well. And that's where I think we can go wrong as coaches and as parents. You touched on it before about the coaches, telling players to stop playing sport. But that's also where coaches, they get their ego involved. And all I would say to any coach listening is we get lots of goals at this. We get loads of goals, of coaching different players or different teams. They get one go. So remove your ego from this. Let's make sure we're giving the right advice even though it might be tough for you in that moment, if it's to move them on to a different coach or give them an advice or lose them to another sport. We've got a fantastic young tennis player right now at the Academy, Irish kid. He's really good at golf, really good. And he hardly plays golf. And it's like, keep playing golf. Play if you want to play tennis as well, do them both. He's 15 now. Do them both, and then let's see. But have options on the table, and maybe in a year or two you're going to have to make a choice maybe in a year or two. But he could probably get a scholarship to America in both. So who am I to tell this kid that he should play tennis over golf? Like it's like and that's the bit that we have to keep remembering as coaches as well.
Yeah. I love that. I love the reality of your sport, and people could call it fluffy, but it's actually the reality. Like, and
Yeah,
when we talk about, James Curran recently followed the All Blacks and wrote the book Legacy, and I said,
yeah,
can anyone be a great All Black? He was like, no, it's the 2% of the 2% from
yeah,
playing in the Premier League academy. It's the Carlos Alcaraz, Djokovic, Federer. Why, like, you're role modeling yourself against them? Like,
yeah,
they're one of one. Like, unfortunately, you're probably not one of one. You're going to be one of maybe 200. But so then pick the, role model, find your level, self awareness. Like, so much of this, in terms of the podcast, what I've learned is it's knowing who you are, but also where you fit in the
yeah,
in the ranking. And, chances are you're not going to be Roy Keane or, whatever sport it is. Know your sport. I just
yeah.
think that's brilliant. Where did you learn that? Was that from your career, or, how have you developed that?
Yeah, look, lots of places. I would give a bit of a shout out to Keith Reynolds, who he's done a lot of work on that. Keith Reynolds is a tennis coach who's fantastic, very philosophical, lovely, lovely guy. Yeah, I've been fortunate to be in his presence over the years. He's not someone I've worked that closely with, but I know he's done loads of work on reality of sport, loads, and like he's done a lot out of there. I think a lot of my you get it, you pick it up along the way, but where I've been blessed in lots of ways was never quite being good enough at the next level. And that sounds a bit, I've done a few conferences on this, and it's like when I was younger I was very good, but I wasn't quite good enough to become a professional at 18. So I went to US college, which was seen as a failure at the time because I was ranked number 6 in the world in juniors and doubles and whatever, 60, 70 in the world in singles, and all of my peer group were going to play professional. But they all stopped playing at 21, 22, whereas I wasn't quite good enough. So I got the opportunity of doing 4.5 years at US college. So that was a whole new network that opened up for me, and I probably avoided the dark side of tennis a bit, which is those lower levels of tennis, which are very difficult at the age of 18. You're just not ready for it emotionally, physically, spiritually, in any way, shape or form. Then I played professional tennis for 3 years. And even though I did okay and was British number one doubles player, wasn't quite good enough that it was an easy decision just to keep going. I was in financial debt, and because of that, and I didn't have a coach, and I was kind of on my own really. But that not quite being good enough after 3 years led me into my next phase of life before maybe I'd lost my marbles too much, which can happen to people, right? They can live this kind of weird, deluded life for many years. And obviously, some people get through it, and that's, I will never know if I would have, but I was I was comfortable. I don't regret that because I accepted my situation. And that then led me into my coaching world. And then, so I think I've been quite lucky that all of those things have and I've had difficult decisions to make, which is and I give my parents a lot of credit for that. They give me a lot of independence. They never made it easy for me to just play tennis and just fund it. And, and I never had federation support, but I didn't, it was, it felt, boy from Newcastle, not to play on that too much, but you don't get many Newcastle people that play tennis. I had to push through different levels and make some big decisions. And I think because I did that, I learnt to appreciate the sport, and then got to meet loads of different people, and my mind then became more open. And then I do think I then became, and probably my big one, and this is yeah, I've talked about this a couple of times on podcasts, but I was the typical sports player that when I stopped playing, I actually started gambling a bit. And I say gambling a bit, gambling a lot. And then that was a big wake up call for me, where, and that was back, what, 2008, that I put my, my last time I gambled. And it's like, and I went to GA meetings and I got involved, but that was a challenging time, but it also built more strength. You're almost building calluses, and you're building different philosophies, and your mind's going into other places, and you're learning from your mistakes, and you're having different conversations, which that probably was what led to me. I then used that energy, into, I've got that personality, right? That it would be a bit of an addictive personality, but I use that energy into setting up an international tennis academy as a British person in Spain, which is no easy task. But rather than my energy going into negative things that I was doing, but those are all things I had to learn the hard way a little bit. And I think learning stuff the hard way, which is why another thing I say a lot to parents is let them fail, man. Like, stop, like, mollycoddling. Like, it's okay. It's okay that your kid's crying because they've lost a match. It's okay that they got cheated out of a match. It's fine. Good. That's going to happen. Welcome to the world, and like all of those things are what build into the character, and turn into more philosophical views that can be then passed on, I think.
Brilliant. One of my favourite questions, if people are listening that regularly listen, you can take your drink now. I always joke, a bit of a drinking game with the same questions. But when we look at the physical and the mental, and you could probably talk about skill challenges as well, or tactical, is tennis at the elite level? Is it more mental or a physical challenge?
I can't answer that. I think it's all too intertwined, if I'm honest. Like, if if you give me the physicality of Carlos Alcaraz, you give me the skill of Roger Federer, boy oh boy am I mentally tough. Because I'm like, you're not going to get the ball past me. I'm like, if you give me the physicality of Dan Kiernan and the skill of my dad, I feel like shit. Mentally, I'm like, I'm all over the place. So I was, in my younger coaching days, I was like, tennis is 80% mental. It's a young coach's statement. It's like, it's where the hell have I got 80% from? I mean, Jesus, who the hell, age 26, who do I think that I'm just chucking out 80% like on the mental game? It's just, it's so intertwined into all of those things. Now, what I would say, if you've got a healthy mental toughness, and how I define that mental toughness is our ability to commit to something helpful, no matter how we feel. And that's something I wish I knew when I was a player as well, because I felt bad, so I felt I was weak mentally. It's like, no, 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 you're uncomfortable 99% of the time on a tennis court. I can't talk about other sports. I love football, I'm a massive football fan, used to be a good footballer. If you're the right back for Barcelona, you're probably not that uncomfortable when Messi's scoring 5 goals. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're not really. It's like these team sports where you got some superstars that are winning games for you. I'm not sure your mental toughness has to be that good on a daily basis. Of course, Champions League final, all of a sudden someone's picking on you, and you have to have it, of course, to play to an elite level. Whereas in tennis from a young age, it's one against one. It's gladiatorial. It's like so much tougher. I used to get called a sissy in Newcastle for playing tennis. No, no, no. You ain't a sissy if you play tennis to a high level. Because it's me and you. Let's go. And it's like boxing, but obviously you're not punching each other, but you are mentally punching each other. It's very gladiatorial in nature. So what I would say, if you learn really strong mental skills, and I call it mental fitness, and you're really strong, you've got a real strong mental fitness, you are more likely to reach your potential. If you've got someone really mentally fit, but physically not so fit, next to someone who is physically really fit, but mentally not fit, I'd pick the mentally fit one that's not so physically fit over the physically fit one that's not mentally fit,
Yeah,
if
it makes
that
sense.
can answer your question
But
in
it
some
is
ways.
still
But
intertwined.
but but
Yeah.
it's intertwined. It has to be because you and I'll challenge my coaches on this, and it's like they'll say, "Oh, this player just is getting so angry all the time." I'll use my son as an example, so I'm not talking about anybody else. I went and watched him play a few months ago. I took him on a trip, and he did so well. Mentally, he can come across like he's quite outward in his emotions, so we see that person as mentally weak. Whereas if a player internalizes and isn't more of an introvert, they don't say anything, but they're playing crap because mentally they're not handling it. But it's just the ones that are outward get the stick in general in tennis, in a sport like tennis where it's like one on one. Whereas I came away from then, he won 3 matches where he was the worst player. And actually, my challenge was his skills aren't good enough. Like he serves not good enough right now, so he's behind in the point all the time. When he's playing in the point, his forehand's not heavy enough. Well, if you go and do anything where you feel you are underskilled against your opponent in any sport or any game or an argument or whatever it might be, you are going to feel very vulnerable out there in that space. So you're going to then naturally struggle more mentally, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? So it's our responsibility of coaches. It's too easy as a coach to just go, oh, they're mentally weak. Okay, well, give them tools, work with them on that area, make sure that they've got strategies in place and they understand, you're learning that skill just like you're learning how to hit a forehand or backhand, but also improve their physical skills and their technical skills and their tactical understanding. And I bet you will see an improvement on the mental side as well. And that's why I don't think that we can isolate them or make bold statements that I used to make 20 years ago, because it's like, nah, it's not quite like that. It just isn't. Um, but yeah, it's interesting, but it's got to get better at all the things all the time. And I'll use one analogy, and I'll give him a shout out. There's a guy called Chris Suter. I don't know if you've come across Chris, but he's a coach educator from Scotland. Great guy, very knowledgeable. And I heard him use this analogy. He said, like, is a skill, if you think of skills, it's like every time you work on a skill, and that could be a mental skill, a physical skill, a technical skill, a tactical skill, you're building a bigger pile of snow. And you're kind of building your piles of snow. If you stop working on that skill, it starts melting, and all of a sudden the pile goes. And it's like, and this is where it's so challenging in I can only talk about tennis as a coach. You're constantly trying to replenish and stay on top of all of the piles of snow, right? And as someone who coaches world-class doubles players, I might have 25 piles of snow that almost I need to, and I'll have spreadsheets going, right, we need to do a bit of this, a bit I need to maintain. And then I might have two real strong key areas that are the most important, real kind of zoning in and getting kind of a little bit deeper into those two areas, that might be linked strongly to their identity or whatever it might be. But if I neglect any of the other areas, don't expect to have it. If you don't go and work out for 3 months, you're not going to be as physically fit. If you don't work on your mental skills for a few weeks, you're not going to be as mentally fit. And I think this is where sometimes we can almost think a little bit too fixed mindset that someone's either got it or they don't. And to a degree, their starting level they do, but we have to keep on building those piles of snow and making sure that they're not melting all the time. And I liked it. I heard Chris say that probably 10 years ago, and it's always kind of stuck in my mind that that's a really important thing for us as well.
Yeah, brilliant. I love the snow thing, first of all, the great visual as well. Also love the answer around it's intertwined. I don't think I've had that before. It's been interesting. Everyone has a different take. No one has kind of repeated the same or a couple of themes, but intertwined. You're a pro as well. I was going to ask, because you coach doubles, and for people that don't know, your players just won the US Open, the women's doubles. So that we're talking the elite, the elite. How do you find coaching? And I love that way, gladiator, one on one. Now you've got two on two. What's the difference between coaching doubles and singles, and how do you approach it?
Um, so a couple of ways I'd bring this forward is one one of my beliefs is you're coaching a person, right? So it's I think being a good coach, if you're a good coach, I think you can almost coach anything because I think when you're coaching the person, which is where a high percentage of coaching is, and those skills, then the next part is having the expertise in whatever that thing is. So in my case, I've coached a lot of singles players. Like I get probably a bit pigeonholed, are you a doubles coach? Well, no, I coach people. I coach people and I've coached people that play tennis. I've coached some people actually that run businesses. I've coached people and it's that's the first point that I would make. Where I would differentiate the singles and the doubles. So coaching a singles player is one job. You are coaching a singles player, a person, one person, and everything revolves around that one person. Coaching a doubles team is three jobs because I have two people that are very different. So I'm coaching that person and I'm coaching that person completely differently because before US Open final, how I would talk to one of them tactically and go through the match is very, like, I can't even begin to tell you how different. I'm very analytical, go through videos, talk about it in that way. With the other one, I've got all the information, but I'm delivering it in a joke at breakfast because that's how they receive information. But then you're coaching the team on how you and what I love about it, because I love coaching people, I love dealing with people. What I love about it is you're bringing two people together that have been taught to be selfish and be independent and individually mindseted and just think about yourself because that's what we teach tennis players. It's about you and you've got to manage yourself and you've got to be selfish with your own time and work out how you. And now we're going, well, actually, how we told you that for 20 years? Nah, now you got to think about this person. And so there's a big, and being able to kind of bring that together, one from just a person point of view in a relationship, a connection, an empathy, and understanding of other, and then obviously the tactical elements, how you're using each other's strengths and hiding each other's weaknesses, and you're blending that together tactically and strategically. So there's many areas of it, but it's yeah, it's doubles. I'm a team person really, even though like I've been in tennis, like I think I naturally work better with teams, and I think probably the same when I played, it just makes a bit more sense to me. I think maybe I wasn't good enough to just have that gladiatorial one-on-one stuff. It still is two-on-two is gladiatorial when they're on the court. I'm going to shoot, but it's different, right? You naturally have, and I'm only talk about me as a player. I was very, very good mentally as a doubles player because I was constantly supporting my partner and I probably took strength from that. But when I was on court as a singles player, I was a bit because I wasn't good at doing it myself, and I think they're two different skills. So there's a lot of similarities, but there's also, yeah, I would say a lot of differences as well. And I think some people are more set for the doubles way from a skill element, but also from just they're a bit better within teams, maybe. Some singles players are a nightmare on the doubles court. You can see it. They're just like, it's foreign to them. It's like, what's this person doing next to me? Like they just can't, what they're talking to me and oh no, they're distracted, like because they're just so single-minded. Um, and I think that's a big reason why some people have success in various versions of the sport, really.
Yeah. How do you approach, the US Open final? What would Grand Slam, any big day with a player, whatever player it is. I've obviously love the way you said there. It's people, it's person first. But how do you approach potentially the biggest day of someone's career as a coach?
Um, well, the Gabby Dabrowski and Erin Routliffe, who I've worked with for 2.5 years, they've they've played in four major finals in 2.5 years, and they've won three. They lost a Wimbledon final last year. Um, they've
Good record.
no, no, they've played nine major titles, major events together. They've won three, finaled at one, three semis and two quarters. They've always made at least the quarterfinals. So you obviously get a lot of confidence as you're going. There's a feeling, there's a bit of an aura going into those events. And what I would say about the later rounds and the US Open final, the first one, the US Open final, they'd never played in a final, US Open final before. That was in 2023. But before that one, there was a bit more. Actually, the day before, my one of my male players had won the mixed doubles at the US Open, so I'd experienced that with him on the Saturday, which was the first Grand Slam title that I was involved in as a coach, and I think that helped because that was on Arthur Ashe, so that being able to share that experience helped. But Gabby also, I remember her um, saying last year I played here. We played on Arthur Ashe Stadium, which is massive and it's quite an intimidating court. It's an amazing court. But last year it was in the first round because it rained, so they put us there. So she goes, I'm just imagining I'm playing a first round match. And and that I thought that was a really she didn't just it wasn't just said, it was believed. It was like, no, no, that's what we're as we've gone through, if we go through then the other events and talk about this year's US Open, certainly me as a coach, I've found I everything gets clearer and clearer for me as the tournament goes. I just get more and more locked in. There's more data available. I've got performance analytics teams that work. I watch a lot. I go into nobody really is going to bother me in those few days. I'm up late at night watching matches and I'm seeing patterns and I get to the point where I almost feel I know where every shot's going actually because I've watched so much in and it's and so I find that quite clear. But if I take this year's US Open and you obviously you have a strong connection to the player, so it's like we stuck to the same routine we always do. I bring together a big presentation on and I deliver that the day before, so they've got that information. Then the day of, it's about them. It's about them getting in the right headspace. And before the semi-finals, though, I felt there was two or three really, really pivotal tactical situations that they had to do well to win the match. So an hour before the match, I said, look, I know I don't normally do this, but I want to sit down with you for 5 minutes, which was maybe they didn't receive that well at first, or certainly one of them didn't. But I said, look, this is the reason, and I just need you to know these three things. I know it was in the presentation. Just need you to know them. I'm telling you, you commit to these things, you win the tennis match. That's I need it. So that was the route, and they played like a perfect, like the best match they've played in 2.5 years to beat Irani and Paolini, which was an unbelievable player. Then in the final, we again same thing, same routine, same presentation. But this came from absolutely knowing the player and knowing the girls. I had so much trust in them, even though they were playing the number one seeds, Siniakova, who's won 10 Grand Slams, women's doubles, Taylor Townsend. They were big favourites. My girls weren't the favourites. And before that match, all I said to them 5 minutes before I called, I could see them going, all right, what's Dan going to tell us today? And I just said, look me in the eye. I just said, I have complete and utter trust in you two today. I completely, I know you're ready. I fully trust you. Give me a hug. Give him a big hug. See you out there. And that was it. And it was that. I guess you feel a moment like that, right? Like it's like it's not a can't overly prepare for that moment because you don't know what's gonna how they're gonna wake up or the feeling you get. But I just had such a strong feeling of that. Said that, and then you walk to the stadium and you're sitting there, and it's kind of out your hands a little bit then. But in tennis, you can also speak to them, but on these big courts, you can't. You're a long way away. And there was then early in the match, I did spot some patterns that were happening, and it again, I felt it was weird. I almost felt like Rain Man out of nowhere. It was like, oh, I can see that. That's happening. And I did just pass on that simple message to them, and maybe a little bit lucky, but that pattern continued. And then in some really big moments, they kind of stole a couple of points linked to that. Um, and you can have a bit of a minimal impact. Whereas for the first round of these big events, you don't know the players as well. They're not as famous. You don't have as much data on them. You're naturally feeling maybe, even though you've won these events, it's a bit of imposter syndrome because it's like, you don't want to lose first round, you don't want to go out early. There's a natural little bit of on edge. You're not quite into your rhythm. You're not quite into that. I always think those are the rounds where it's a little bit harder. I don't quite feel as settled, but once you're in the event, it almost feels like. But I would that previous experience of success, which always helps, right? That makes a big, big difference at the end of the day.
And the experience of even being out on Arthur Ashe Court and saying, like, approaching
Yeah.
that as the as a round one, like that's just class. What I my favorite question of all time, Dan, and I've gone so off track with this, but I've loved this conversation. I've learned loads. What separates the greats from the rest? Like they're all elite when you get to the level that you're operating at, but what separates the really great ones from the rest of the pack?
Um, I think the first thing I'd say on that, I'm not that qualified on that question. And again, the girls, I love them to bits. And if they do happen to listen to this, I think they'd be the first to say they're not classed as great yet. Like they've achieved and they're having a very successful career. But the real greats obviously are the ones that are winning multiple slams and are going down in the history books. So part of me goes, I can't answer that at all because I don't know. Like I think it's almost a little bit presumptuous of me to think that I would know. So it is really really difficult. I the only thing I would say is every level that I've been fortunate enough to be round, it always hits me. The attention to detail goes up, in terms of, um, I remember the first time one of my juniors hit with Rafael Nadal, and it was like relentless, just like in every sense of the word. It was completely mind-boggling, and it was just every shot had purpose, it had intention, it had it, there was nothing wasted, and I used to use the word obsessed, but I actually asked Andy Murray when I had him on the podcast about that word obsessed. And he said actually he's learned that that's an unhealthy word. When people that are obsessed, it actually becomes a little bit unhealthy. And, so he said that he'd learned over the years not to be obsessed, but in the way that us maybe mere mortals would use the word obsessed. That I guess maybe a word is curious, but it's stronger than curious, and it's maybe not as strong as obsessed, but it's every detail. I have got some insight into Novak Djokovic, and I mean, it sounds like hell working in his team, like absolute hell, because the detail is just like off the charts. It's like just crazy. And I don't think Andy Murray could handle it. Andy's not told me that, but just, what I could kind of see a bit from the outside and what, other people have kind of told me. Like there was one session where Novak was speaking to Andy for like an hour and a half about his split step on the return of serve. And I don't think Andy was prepared for that. It was like, I heard he got given like this big manual when he started. These are the things that we have to say and do around Novak. I've experienced at Wimbledon this year. It was like some kind of cult, it felt. We were in the locker room, not the locker room, we were in the gym and he was about to go out on his match on centre court, and all of a sudden they all came out. They were all dressed in white, which obviously is a Wimbledon thing, but just for players. But all of his team were dressed in white, and they all stood around, and he did this little kind of batak game for 2 minutes, and then they all were in a circle, and there was. It almost, I felt like I shouldn't be there, it felt like I was in the wrong place, but it was like, whoa, like this intensity and this. So maybe it's a crap answer, but I would say attention to detail. But I just want to qualify that by saying I'm not qualified because I haven't had the privilege of fully being on the inside of how these true greats do operate. What I would say is I would imagine it's not an easy place to be a lot of the time because it's so locked in.
Wow. Geez, that's fascinating. And I suppose, and I didn't mean that as in you've all the insights. It's just interesting. I asked a journalist, I said, from what you see, what separates the greats from the rest? And it's fascinating the way everyone gives a different answer. I've never actually, I don't think I've had attention to detail
Yeah, but
from,
I just think all I would say on that, Ola, though, is like if we take a journalist, I would just challenge how does a journalist doesn't know, you
yeah,
know, because it's like just like I don't, because it's like where where these where these true greats are being born and made is outside of the public eye. It's like that's for me, that's where the real answer is. It's happening. It's happened at home. It's happened how they've been brought up. It's happened. You can speculate on Andy Murray, and I certainly have speculated. Dunblane, you start putting the things together. He was in the school where the shooting happened. That's like a massive trauma. There's often traumas that do lead to these things. His mum and dad got divorced at quite a young age, and that was a big trauma for him. His brother then left at a young age. That was a big trauma for him. Like, and these a bit like what I said earlier. One of the questions around, the losing or the difficulties you have, and I haven't had those traumas, but they are the things that lead into you making a decision for something else. And I do think you have quite not all of them, but you have quite a few. Novak Djokovic talks about all the time, like his upbringing, and his dad had 10 euros left, and he was playing tennis in a swimming pool, but there's so many things that go into that. And again, Novak which had like financial support by people you don't want financial support of, like so for the first few years of him playing like but it's hard to get into that real headspace. But I think there is a lot more that goes into all ththese stories that in reality we don't really know, and we can cling on to one or two things and go, oh, that's why it is. But this is then the issue because people then try and replicate it and it's not authentic, and they end up with broken families, and they end up with broken kids because it almost you can't replicate. It's not a cookie cutter exercise. It's everybody's got their own individual journeys, just like we don't know what people's relationships like or people's families are like because there's so many details that are behind closed doors that I'm sure have gone into these champions. The one that I think is more fascinating on the tennis side than any of them is Carlos Alcaraz because he doesn't seem like he's had any trauma in his life. He seems like the most humble, down to earth dude you could ever meet with the most amazing family. And he looks like he's playing in the playground when he's playing on centre court at Wimbledon. And it's like, how amazing is this? Like, this is not what we're used to seeing. We used to think you used to have to be a bit nuts and have all of these like things happen to you in life, you know? And I think that's amazing. Or Yannick Sinner won Australian Open last year, and he made a speech about how amazing his parents are, and they never put any pressure on him, and he wants to thank them for that. And that was like, whoa, how refreshing is this? We used to think parents had to be nuts and basically like make their kids suffer in order for them to be champion. And I think it's so important that we do get those messages, because people tend to want a cookie cutter and do what other people have done, rather than live their authentic lives, really.
Yeah, brilliant. No, and you're dead right, and it's funny that, they do the research on it, but it's more they're spotting the patterns of the likes of they do say a lot of the super champions have trauma or resilience and all that stuff. The one thing I've been noting, if you're wondering why I was looking off, I've made a couple of notes on what you need to be from chatting to you, what you need to be the best athlete or a tennis player, whatever it needs to be. So from chatting to you, you have to play multiple sports or try to play to a certain age. Unconditional love at home, but you need to be a competitor. A messy house helps. Um, American sports or throwing, gymnastics also might be key. Um, Being creative, good footwork, but really, know the reality of your sport. Um, be intent, and whatever that word is between curious and obsessed, and then you'll probably find success in whatever avenue it is. So if I hit nearly all the boxes with that,
There's two words I'd change.
go for it.
Your first two words you used, have to. I
Very good.
I would absolutely again not be telling anyone what they have to do, and I just, yeah, on that again, I would just stress that it's like what fits into your life, your means, your family values, your family setup, and that's the thing for me, but certainly listening to those back, I maybe for the first time ever, I actually think it's quite sound advice, and so thank you for articulating that for me.
Yeah, no bother. Come
I
here.
could have saved you a
We're
lot of time if I just said it a bit clearer at the start,
that was a 2 minute episode just listing them out in your
huh?
head. Um, Dan, I'm conscious of time. I'm going to bring this to a close, but I want to get you back on for part two because I haven't actually asked most of the questions I want to ask because we went down some brilliant rabbit holes as usual. So I'm going to move on to sideline seven, but we will sit down again. And record another episode. The same seven questions at the end of every episode. Conscious, I didn't give you much of a heads up, but I'll start with question one. What's your favorite quote?
Oof, favorite quote. Um, I should have read these. This is what you sent to me before, a few minutes before. Um, um, the one that would jump to my mind that I say a lot, actually, and I say it to my kids a lot. I say it at the academy a lot, and I try and live my life like this. Is 10% of life is what happens to us, 90% is how we respond, and and I guess that links into the controllables, because we can control our response in all situations. We can't always control what happens to us, and I think that's it's a nice way for us all to try and live our lives. And I think if we're able to live our lives like that, I think it does bring this kind of healthy mental toughness, this healthy mindset that leads to ultimately a happier, healthier life, I think.
Brilliant. Question two, best sporting event you've been to?
Got to be one, or can I give two or three?
Give a few. Go on, go for it.
Um, the first one that I will jump to my head, it's the best sporting event in the world, in my opinion, is the Ryder Cup. Um, for me, it's the best. I actually heard them talking about it on the overlap a couple of weeks ago, and every single one of them got it wrong apart from Ian Wright. So I don't know if they're listening to this, but Ian Wright talked about it, and the arrogant football guys were, oh, it's so bad. It's this. No, golf's not my number one sport. I will watch the Masters. I will watch the majors if I can, but I am devastated if I miss a shot of the Ryder Cup. That's for me what sport is all about, passion, teamwork. I have been to two. Um, Glen Eagles I went to, and I was also in Rome a couple of years ago. And and what I would say, it's a better TV spectator sport, but to feel the atmosphere of a Ryder Cup, and to feel the Friday morning on the first tee, and getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, or even 3 o'clock in the morning, to be at the place at four, then like sprinting in with all these other kind of passionate Ryder Cup fans, and trying to get your seat, and just being around that. And Glen Eagles, you've got to be quite strategic when you go, but we made our way to the 17th green. You only really get to watch four holes in a day because you can't get close. So you either like try and follow and miss everything, or you've got to set your stall out. But any advice, if you go to ride a couple, make sure you've got a TV in the background. They've got big TVs everywhere. And we got on the 17th hole in Glen Eagles, and Rory made a 30-foot putt to win the hole, to take it to the 18th, and the place just absolutely erupted. So that was really, really cool. I'm a die-hard Newcastle United fan. Um, I can't not mention them, and uh, I wasn't at the Carabao Cup final. I was in Miami this year, unfortunately. But my dad, I was crying my eyes out because my dad was there and he'd never seen them win at anything, and to that, and my brother as well, were big, big Newcastle fans. But I was at the cup final a couple of years earlier, or the year earlier, a couple of years earlier, um, and just being in Newcastle is meant so much to me, the place, but also the football team, but much deeper than just a game of football. When I think about all the things it's taught me, and the values also, I'm trying to, the Northeastern values that were kind of ingrained in me at a young age, to go down to Wembley with 50, 60,000 Geordies, and see what it meant for me. Actually, one of my takeaways from that day, we lost to Manchester United, who I hate. But so it wasn't the ending I wanted, but to see these kind of 60, 70, 80-year-old men crying their eyes out before the match, what it means to be in that environment, for me, was a special sporting event to be a part of. And then the last one, US Open final. And and actually, I would go to, I mean, the ones I've been fortunate enough to be part of, the winning teams. But if I go to 2023, I had this just quite incredible weekend on Arthur Ashe, basically, which was all the more special for me because I was actually, they actually got me out of running the Great North Run, which also upset me. My mum is been suffering with dementia for many, many years. She's, in a very bad way now, but all the family were running for Alzheimer's that weekend, and friends, and there was about 25, 30. And if my teams didn't make the final of US Open, I was going back to run it with everybody, which I wasn't prepared for. So I always joke that my teams got me out of a lot of trouble, but it was obviously then very emotional. I wasn't there, and then this weekend unfolded in New York, where my one of the male players I was working with, alongside his partner, won the mixed doubles against Jess Pegula and Austin Krajicek, who were again big favourites on Arthur Ashe, American crowd. I then One of my players at the academy, who was at university in New York, he was at the final, and he called me and said, we've got friends that are in the ESPN suite. If you want to come to watch Coco Gauff play Arina Sabalenka." So that happened. We celebrated. I then went into the ESPN suite, which an event in itself, the US Open final for singles. It's like just looking around. It's like Tom Brady's there. Goldie Hawn, like you're just seeing all of the, and to have that, and to see Coco Gauff win her first Grand Slam in an incredible match, then go back and scout, and then my girls to win on Arthur Ashe a few hours later. And a bit of a funny side note on that story, the player that I was, would be, Tom would have been 21, 22. So when we got into the suite and he was speaking to his friends and speaking to the people he knew, he was going, "Oh, this is my coach from Spain, and his players have just won the." They were like, "What?" They didn't know what. They were like, "Yeah, right, whatever." Like they didn't think it was true. I think they thought he was just saying things. And then after the girls won, well, you then go on court and you're lifting the trophy and you're doing it. And it was a long match and they were trying to get us off the court, but we were milking it for all it was worth. And because Novak Djokovic and Daniil Medvedev were going on for their final. And as I walked off, I looked up and I saw the ESPN suite and I saw this group of women that were friends of Tom, and they were looking almost in shock, like, "Oh, you was actually being serious. There you are, you know." And me and one of the coaches of the other girls, we were just hitting balls into the stands, and we were kind of milking it. So I would be wrong. It would be impossible for me not to mention that experience as well.
Amazing. I love the variety and the importance of each of them. Question three, biggest setback or challenge so far in your career, and how did you react to it?
Um, when I'll be a bit quicker, but I have a couple. But as a player, I actually broke my foot 1 week before my first big match started in my freshman year at Louisiana State University. Um, how I reacted to it is I went and bought 24 beers every weekend and two extra large pizzas and sat there complete depressed mess for about 6 weekends in a row where my teammates went off. So I wouldn't say I responded well at all to that. Um, then when I did come out of the boot and started playing again, we had an incredible end to the season. But I would like to think I would respond better to that now than I did at that time. I mentioned this earlier. COVID was definitely a massive. I mean, that basically in my business, in my field, it basically all there's no rhyme or reason why we would stay alive, to be honest. And I think that mindset, that control the controllables mindset, that we can campaign, was just the perfect response. And not from myself, I led it, but I had just an incredible team that got fully behind it, and then incredible parents that then fully engaged in it as well and supported it, and because of that, we just about stayed on our feet. Um, and then a one that we're currently having to respond to. I probably won't go into massive details on because there's potentially some legalities linked to it, but I've had a big issue with a business partner linked to setting up an opposing tennis academy. Um, One day I'll write a book and people won't believe what's quite happened in this instance. But I'm massively proud again of how the team, they've taken 50 of our players and nine of our tennis coaches of our team, and we've just responded unbelievably well. And I guess the thing that I would say that we've responded well is we've gone back to what's important to us. It's all been brought back to us rather than externalizing and feeling sorry for ourselves and blaming, and which we could have easily go down that route. We've actually gone, well, what can we do better? And who are we? And what's our reason? And why do we do what we do? And let's realign that strongly. And that's the only reason I share that, is because I think that's an important message for anybody listening, that, when you're going through difficult times, if you can just bring it back to you and what you can and need to do better, and make sure you've got a strong alignment of your purpose, then actually you can push through more difficult times than you realize. And that's something that I would say I'm really proud of, the how we've responded to the last two. Not so proud of the 18-year-old Dan drinking Roland Rock beer and eating Papa John's pizza. Although Papa John's was maybe too expensive for me, it was probably some more crappy pizza than that. um but yeah, those are three probably big moments in different stages of my career.
Brilliant. The flip side then, your biggest achievement in or outside of sport.
um Biggest achievement in or outside of sport. Yeah, I mean, I don't do it enough, but having a somewhat functioning family, um, in the modern world of, and also in the, I have the devil of ambition in me. And I'm jealous of people that don't. I think life's a bit more simple when you don't. Um, but I guess to be able to to move from the UK to Spain with nothing set up. It was very much on a bit of a whim. We did prepare for it, but we didn't have anything substantial in place when we came. To be able to do that whilst, we had a 9-month-year-old daughter at the time. The first day we arrived in Spain, we found out we were pregnant with our second child. We've got 3 kids. Very happily married with 3 amazing kids through that whole process, which is obviously very, very stressful and challenging and has impacted a lot of lives over the last 16 years. Ultimately that's my, if I was to reflect, that's my biggest achievement. Without, and that's not my achievement, that's us as a family, our achievement on how we've done that. Um, there's then, very obviously probably to look at the Grand Slam wins as a coach, which is amazing, and as someone who is ambitious and who's been in this sport, to be a part of 3 Grand Slam wins, WTA final wins, world number one, but having being a part of those things, it honestly is just as much as an achievement when a kid comes in, and and I use this as an example previously, but we had a kid who came into the academy age 13 who had never really played tennis. So this counter predicts goes a little bit against Connor maybe, albeit he's not going to be a Carlos Alcaraz, but I knew his dad, and his dad had actually he'd won a day in the life of training like a pro tennis player at the academy in an auction. We'd given that as a prize in a charity auction. And he came in at the end of the day. He said, look, could this young man join the academy? I said, look, well, the issue is he doesn't really play it. And tennis is not really a sport. You can do that. But he was a really good athlete, this kid, which is why I say these other sports are so important as well. And fast forward 5 years, and he's just gone on a scholarship to the US, um, which is almost unheard of in tennis. In golf and other sports, it's possible from because I know that from the golf academy near us. But that alongside the other, I think it's 58 we're at now, kids that have gone on to scholarships at the US in the 16 years, 15 and a half years at the academy. Those honestly mean as much as winning Grand Slams, and kids that have got mental health issues, and they get to get over those because of tennis, and that goes into the mission of the academy, which is impacting people's lives positively through the vehicle of tennis. That was always what we wanted to do. So that as an overarching thing would be something that, again, I'm very proud of that achievement over the last 15 and a half years.
Wow. Looking back, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Don't drink beer and eat pizza when you break a bone. Would probably be one. Um, a couple of ones that would be one, life is not fair. Get over yourself. It's not fair. Stop using that as bullshit excuse for, why you do certain things, move on. I was very much, it's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair. I was one of those guys way too much. I wish that I had a better mentality on that. And then one that's had a massive impact on me, and I wish I'd understood this earlier. And it's some people think this is morbid, but I think it massively helps my perspective, and I think it would help me as an 18-year-old, that nobody gets out of here alive. So bloody enjoy it. Do you know what I mean? Like enjoy it, enjoy the challenge, and I just think that perspective is massive. And I wished I'd had that. Sorry to my wife who's listening, but I wish I had that perspective when I was talking to girls when I was in college, or like, oh, what if, like in 18-year-olds out there that are so scared to have a conversation, and conversation with someone who you want a job with, a conversation, like, uh, and then same as a tennis player, when I was a player, I wished I'd had that perspective that this is not that important. Just flip and give your best, express yourself, get stuck in. And I think it's so much easier to have that level of mindset if certainly for me, understanding that, this whole thing that we're doing, none of us are going to leave here alive. Like it's just brought a really nice perspective. Whether I would understand that and be able to take it on board at 18 is maybe another thing.
Yeah. Question six, dream dinner guest and why?
Um, Oh, jumps to my head, Alan Shearer, because he's my hero. But I don't have a substantial reason why, other than he's just Alan Shearer and he's my hero, and
Yeah.
um, I think I would, and actually, I'd maybe ask him. I know you mentioned Roy Keane earlier. I'd maybe ask him about when Roy Keane spat his dummy out at St James's Park, and he's still talking about it now. Roy Keane, in quite a bitter, twisted way about Shearer. Um, I'd like to hear that story on what was actually said on the pitch. But I think. As I have to keep it in tennis, I don't want to go too far afield, into there's obviously bigger life things, but I think Roger Federer, and I
Oh
think
yeah.
and I think with Roger, I think so he's a year younger than me. I knew him quite well in juniors, and it was probably I'll get the year wrong, but let's say it was 2099. I was working at Wimbledon, which is where I met my wife actually, in working for IBM doing the match statistics, which I was a bit embarrassed doing because I had an ego and I was a good junior and I was in college and I was seeing players that I used to play all the time and they're playing Wimbledon, but I'm working there. So I kind of would try and avoid them as much as I could. But the Dog and Fox is a famous pub in Wimbledon Village. And when you work at Wimbledon doing the stats, you can tend to meet up and have a drink at a night. It's very social. And Roger Federer was standing in the doorway, looking, to be honest, a bit kind of lechy. He was drinking a pint of beer. He certainly, when you see him now, he's like James Bond, right? But he had like long greasy hair, kind of talking to girls, and just he was a bit. Guys have all been there, right? And he was. And as I walked past, he was, "Oh, Dan, how's things?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, all right." And I was kind of a bit embarrassed. Yeah, I'm kind of in college and I'm doing, I'm working here. And what about you? And he said to me, and it sticks out and it really stands in my mind. He said, "Nah, shit, really good." Because I lost first round, bit crap, struggling really, because I'm still in the doubles. I think he was playing doubles with Yevgeny Kafelnikov. Just, yeah, a bit rubbish. Anyway, a year later, anyone that follows tennis, he beat Pete Sampras at Wimbledon 12 months later. He then lost to Tim Henman in the quarterfinals, but the following year he then won Wimbledon. And Roger Federer became this most unbelievably polished professional tennis player that obviously went on and won his 20 Grand Slams or whatever it was, and arguably, whether he's the greatest of all time statistically, had most influential male tennis player of all time. And I would just love to ask him what happened in that period because he was he was absolutely going down the wrong path, which most of us were. He was just being a young lad who wasn't fully focused on his tennis career. And people have speculated his coach, Peter Carter, when he was younger, died, and he then met Merker, who is now his wife, these things. But I'd just love to know what flipped because we don't often, I always think this in sport, it's not easy to change your curve. People will naturally improve, but he fully changed. He fully changed and went from being symbolically, but also in person, the person who was sitting around drinking pints of beer after losing a match in Wimbledon Village to 12 months, 24 months later, starting his journey to winning all these Grand Slams, becoming one of the greatest ever. And I would just love to know what happened in that period for that to have changed so fast. And that would be, I'd probably, by the time the starter's out, I probably would have already asked that question, I think.
Brilliant. That's a brilliant question. Final question before I let you go. Very conscious of time. I'd say you're wrecked. If your life was a book, Dan, what chapter would this be called?
Control the controllables. But it's been a long chapter because I think that's probably been the last 15 or 20 years. But I just think it would be very difficult for it not to be because that is that is genuinely the thing that I know. There's kind of the subplottings of that, of 10% of life is what happens to you, 90% is how you respond, that's a controllable. There's all of these other little kind of subheadings that would link into it, but ultimately that is how I'm trying to live my life to the best of my ability. There's things I can absolutely do better on that, but that is also what gives me the perspective that's enabled me to help the players, help the academy podcast, which is obviously called that as well. So it's a long old chapter, but I think it would be hard for it not to be called that.
Brilliant. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining me. I'm looking forward to part two already, and I look forward to listening to your podcast and watching what you do in the next couple of months as well.
Thanks for having me, Ola. Thank you.